Says it's recording, so I think we can go ahead and start the meeting. Chair Davies.
Thank you, Alice. Well, welcome and good evening, everyone. Welcome to the first TOC meeting of the new term year. My name is Frank Davies, and I'm the chair of the Measure M2 Taxpayer Oversight Committee, or TOC. I'd like to call this meeting to order. Per Governor Newsom's executive order authorizing a local legislative body to hold public meetings via teleconference and make public meetings accessible electronically to the public, this meeting is accessible through the OCTA website, and members will be calling in remotely to practice social distancing. Ms. Rogan, will you please read any public comments that were submitted by the deadline?
Chairman Davies, there were no public comments submitted by the deadline. Teleconference notice was posted on the OCTA website approximately 1 week prior to the meeting, inviting members of the public to submit comments on agenda items via email, and we received none.
Great, thank you. I'd like to welcome our 3 new members and our 1 returning member. Would you like to each take a second to introduce yourself and tell us what interested you in volunteering for the TOC? Can we start with Andrew?
Yeah, thanks for the introduction. This is Andy Ramirez. I was actually part of the CAC prior to this, and I've been trying a couple times just to see what I could do to help this team out as well. And my background's in finance, and just enjoying my the potential to help the community and OCTA specifically with my skills in finance and my want to help the community. Yeah, so thanks again for letting me join.
Thank you, Andy. Ajay? I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly.
Yes. Thank you, guys, for selecting me in this committee. And my background, I'm a realtor by profession, and my background is engineering and finance. So I'm hoping to contribute something to the community. Till now, I've been working so hard, so it's a little extra time. So I thought if I can be helpful to the community, it would be great. Thank you.
Thank you. Shannon?
Hi there, Shannon O'Toole. My background includes a career with HUD, U.S. Housing and Urban Development, and also with FDIC, which was really exciting when all the banks were in trouble. So background is finance, it is accounting, it is programs and policies, it is legislation. So I hope I can take the skills I've put together here and practiced over the years and bring them to the Measure M and the OCTA. And I hope I can be useful in a lot of different areas. Looking forward to the opportunity. Thanks.
Thank you. Mark, I know that you're returning, but would you like to say something?
Thank you, Frank. I appreciate it. I'm delighted to be back for a second term, honored that was selected, and just welcome the new TOC members. And you're joining a group that is a pleasure to work with, and the work that OCTA is doing for our community to improve transit and transportation across our county is phenomenal. So delighted to be back.
Thank you, Mark, and welcome back. Next, Ms. Rogan, will you go over the protocol announcements and take attendance roll call, please?
Yes. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. This is Alice Rogan, the staff liaison to the TOC. Due to the TOC members teleconferencing into today's meeting, a roll call vote will be recorded for attendance and for items that require action by the TOC. A few meeting protocol reminders for TOC members and staff participating: to mute your phone and or your computer and unmute only when speaking. TOC members, state for the record your name when speaking. Staff, state for the record your name and job title. Feel free to have your camera off or on, although like Christina mentioned earlier today, we seem to be having some Zoom issues. So if you want to keep yours off unless you're speaking, presenters will have their cameras on, but you don't need to do so if you prefer to have it off. We did share some Zoom backgrounds with you in the agenda posting email if you'd like to use them. And then for your information, the TOC is being live streamed on YouTube and has a 20-second delay from the live meeting. You can utilize the raise your hand and chat box feature in Zoom to ask questions, or else you can ask Chair Davies to let him know that you have something to say. We are going to be monitoring both the chat box and the raise your hand feature though as well. So I'm going to now begin the attendance roll call. Ajay Katani.
Present.
Andrew Ramirez.
Here.
Doug Anderson.
Here.
Doug Gillen. Doug, I understand you were having some audio problems. I see your name there, but you're muted and it shows a red mic, but we see you. Frank Davies.
Present.
Joe McCarthy.
Here.
Mark Kazar.
Here.
Michael Pasquale. Shannon O'Toole.
Yes.
Steve Sloan.
Here.
Tuan Nguyen.
Here.
Okay, circling back to Doug Gillen. Doug, maybe you can put in the chat box that you're here. And then Michael Pasquale. Chair Davies, that completes the attendance roll call.
Thank you, Ms. Rogan. Could you please join me now in the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag of the United States? I ask that you either mute your microphone or mouth the words in order to avoid any audio issues. We have a flag being displayed now. Ready? Begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Next on the agenda, we have item 3, and that's the minutes and attendance report for the June 8th, 2021 meeting, both being found in your agenda packets. Any changes or comments related to the minutes or attendance report? Hearing none, can I have a motion and a second to approve the minutes and attendance report?
Motion to approve.
Please, when you do provide a motion, please state your name.
Ajay Ketani.
Thank you,
Motion
Ajay.
to approve.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
Very Sloan, seconds.
Is that Doug Anderson?
I think I may have gotten in there first, yes.
Okay, thank you, Doug. Alice, could you please perform a roll call vote?
Yes, Ajay Katani.
Yes.
Andrew Ramirez.
Yay.
Doug Anderson.
Aye.
Doug Gillen.
Aye.
Hey, we hear you now. Frank Davies.
Aye.
Joe McCarthy.
Aye.
Mark Kazar.
Aye.
Michael Pasquale. Shannon O'Toole. Shannon.
Yes.
Steve Sloan.
Approve.
Tuan Nguyen.
Aye.
We'll just circle back to Michael Pasquale. Okay, motion passes.
Thank you, Alice. That brings us to item number 4, and those are presentation items from staff. First up being presentation on the environmental programs update from Dan Fu with OCTA Planning. Dan?
Good evening, Chair Davies and committee members. I'm noticing my video is lagging a bit, so I'm gonna go ahead and turn off the video and leave my mic on. So tonight I'll be presenting to you a status and update of the 2 environmental programs. So under Measure M, OCTA has 2 environmental programs. The first one that I'll be talking about is actually tied to the 13 freeway projects. It's for mitigation purposes. And the second program, the second environmental program that I'll be talking about is actually not mitigation, and it's more of a competitive grants program that's similar to what Joe Alcock would be presenting an update to later on tonight. So with that, next slide, please. So as I mentioned earlier, this particular program is tied to the 13 freeway projects. As you're aware, under Measure M or OCGO, there are 13 freeway projects. And of the 13 freeway projects in the sales tax measure, it sets aside 5% of the 43%. So the 13 freeway project comprised of, if you will, in looking at a pie chart, the 43% of the overall OCGO, and this particular program is 5% of that 43%. So with that, in terms of the mitigation mechanism, OCTA had acquired conservation lands as well as funding of habitat restoration projects over the years. Next slide, please. So OCTA initiated a conservation plan. It's actually a long-winded name called a Natural Community Conservation Plan, which is a state document, and a Habitat Conservation Plan, which is a federal document in 2010. And we just call it conservation plan to simplify things and make it, much easier to kind of comprehend and understand. And along with the conservation plan, there was also a state and federal environmental document that accompanied that process. That process took about roughly 7 years to complete. It was a very comprehensive county kind of assessment in terms of opportunities for mitigation as it ties to the 13 freeway projects. And it also includes permits for water quality permits, and that's where you see the Clean Water Act permits. These are actually with different agencies. So the agencies that we have worked with over the years include Caltrans, or the California Department of Transportation, because they are ultimately the owner operator of the freeway and highway system. And then we have also worked with state and federal wildlife agencies, and they're in particular the California Department of Fish and Wildlife and the United States Fish and Wildlife Service. And then the very last sub-bullet there, you see state and federal regulatory agencies. What we're referring to is the State Water Board and the United States Army Corps of Engineers. So these are all the agencies who have worked on with respect to the conservation plan as well as the Clean Water Act permits. Next slide, please. So in terms of the conservation planning process, we had looked at, in a way, what would the 13 freeway projects have impacts to from a biological resources standpoint? So that's kind of one dimension of looking at things. And then on the other hand, looked at how we can mitigate for impacts as a result of the freeway construction activities. So that's basically what this conservation planning process and cover species entail. And the cover species are effectively those which are impacted by the construction of those 13 freeway projects. So as you can see here in this particular slide, there are 4 bird species, 3 reptile, 3 plants, 2 mammals, and 1 fish species. And the idea of endeavoring in a conservation planning process is some sort of assurance that we know at this time we're going to impact those species, and there's no sort of, if you will, negotiation down the line with those permitting agencies, because ultimately when we implement the various freeway projects, we need those state and federal permits. So in order to have the assurance up front, we basically work with those agencies up front to what we call cover species, to mitigate for these species by way of acquiring conservation lands and funding habitat restoration projects, such that when we do end up implementing the projects, there won't be any surprises. So next slide, please. So in terms of the investments, OCTA has acquired a total of 7 conservation properties, or what we call preserves, And so effectively, those 1,300 acres or 7 properties will be protected in perpetuity, meaning they will never be developed on because they're used as mitigation lands that are tied to a set of state and federal permits that are tied to the freeway program. And then we also funded 11 habitat restoration projects totaling roughly 350 acres. And what habitat restoration in simple terms entails is if there are areas that are basically taken over by invasive species, then the restoration sponsor will go in and again, in simple terms, basically take out all of the invasive species and replant native species to facilitate with the wildlife coming back into the area. And then there was also one dam removal project in the Cleveland National Forest that we funded. So it was to remove dams that were impeding fish passage, which is why it was a dam removal project. And these dams were built actually over 100 years ago before the science and so forth have been determined that it was actually impeding fish passage. Next slide, please. So this is a map of the entire county. You can see given that Measure M is a sales tax for the entire county, the investments were made throughout pretty much the entire county where there are opportunities. So on where you see the blue properties, those are the conservation properties or preserves. And where you see the orange properties, those are the habitat restoration projects. So on the blue properties, OCTA currently hold fee titles to these properties, and we're currently managing them on an interim basis. Eventually, they will be transitioned to a longer-term manager who likely will not be OCTA, and also a title fee holder who will not be OCTA, because these are going to be conservation properties in perpetuity, and OCTA's core business function is as a transportation agency. So that's the reason why we're looking to transition them to what I call logical landowners and managers down the line. And then when you're looking at the orange properties, these are properties we have invested, the 12, 11 plus the 1 dam removal that I referred to a moment ago. These are properties that we have funded habitat restoration, but we're not the property owner. They're currently owned by other property owners, for instance, the county or state parks or other conservation entities, for which the purpose again is that these are conservation properties. We're simply coming in to enhance them above and beyond the condition that's out there today. So next slide, please. So for the next several slides, these are just examples of some of the preserves and habitat restoration properties. So the Silverado Chaparral is located in the Silverado Majeska area. I believe it's roughly 300 acres. As you can see, it's in pretty pristine conditions. The Pacific Horizon is roughly 150 acres, and it is located in Laguna Beach next to the Ben Brown Golf Club. I believe it's still called the Ben Brown. I'm not sure if that name has changed, but it's located in Laguna Beach. Next slide, please. Live Oak Creek and Trabuco Rose are located within the Foothill Trabuco area. So Live Oak Creek is, I believe, 84 acres, and Trabuco Rose is roughly about 400 acres. Next slide, please. So here's an example of one of the covered species, the mountain lion, and this was captured in a wildlife camera. So those investments that we have made, we know for sure that the wildlife out there do utilize these properties, and that it is effectively being used by the wildlife that's out there. Next slide, please. So here is a habitat restoration project. The upper left is the before. Big Bend is actually located in Laguna Beach off State Route 133. And the lower right is the after condition. So you can see the before, it was pretty barren, and the after condition obviously is thriving with native species. And the importance of this particular project as an example is that it provides wildlife movement into the Orange County Parks' Aliso and Wood Canyon Wilderness Park. So that's just an example of why these habitat restoration projects are important. Next slide, please. So in terms of the mitigation program, it is a program that I noted we have been working on more or less since the inception of the sales tax measure in 2007. As you know, the sales tax measure passed in late 2006. And so it has actually caught the attention of even the Federal Highway Administration. So next slide, please. So this particular program has caught the attention of not just Federal Highway Administration, but also the state DOT or Caltrans at the headquarters level, where they have tried to use the successful elements of our program to try to emulate a similar program at the state level, as well as Federal Highway looking at kind of a history of the program to see the successes we've had and some of the lessons learned. And they actually did a white paper on our program recently. So this is something that we're very proud of, and we work closely with the Federal Highway Administration on this case study. So I think with that concludes my remarks on the mitigation program. I'd be happy to answer any questions before we get into the other program.
It's really interesting. What was the gap in that restoration project with the before and after?
In terms, I'm sorry, if you can clarify your question in terms of—
No, the years, like, was it like 5 years, 2 years, a year?
Oh, okay. So yes, thank you. So one of the reasons why, and I probably should have touched on this, why there's an investment in kind of two areas, acquiring conservation lands versus funding restoration, habitat restoration projects, was that when you acquire conservation lands, what you acquire is pretty much out there today. What you see is more or less what you get, although there could be improvements by way of habitat restoration performed on the properties. With a restoration project, oftentimes it's a function of nature cooperating. So in other words, when you are out there to perform the habitat restoration, it may take upwards of 10 years. So the first few years may be eradication of all the wild invasive species to make sure they don't come back, and it's pretty labor intensive. And then there is what is called a plant establishment period, roughly in the order of magnitude years 0 to 3 is basically removing invasives. 3 to about 5 or 6 year, 3 to 5 or 6 is the plant establishment. And then 7 to 10 is roughly the monitoring. This is just kind of a ballpark. It's not the same for every project, but it's kind of a phase that you kind of go through for these habitat restoration projects. And what OCTA has found over the years is it is very much a function of how much nature cooperates, meaning how much rainfall you get, because in the earlier years when the plants are still young and vulnerable, there are actually in some instances where the habitat restoration project sponsor had to install irrigation, and that's labor intensive and also costly because of having to pay for water and so forth. So it is a process, and it does take a while. And sometimes if nature doesn't cooperate, then things will take longer than what you anticipate. And then there's ultimately a sign off by the wildlife agencies that your project is basically up to snuff before they sign off on it and say, okay, we're going to give you mitigation credit of X number of acres, for said project. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, pretty much. It's really interesting to see how the OCTA does that. Thank you.
Sure. Okay, so you want to go ahead, Jared, and put the other PowerPoint up? Okay, so this particular program, so I mentioned the previous program was 5% of the 43%, 5% of the freeway mode. This program is 2% of the entire measure, sales tax measure. And I think it's calculated slightly differently. This one is 2% on top. The other one is there are some things that I understand are netted out, but they often get confused. But the easy way to look at it is the first program that I talked about was strictly mitigation to offset impacts from a set of freeway projects. This particular program is the complete antithesis of the first program, where if it in fact is mitigation, is not eligible for this pot of money. And the idea and genesis behind the thought process, and next slide please, behind this program was that it was to improve water quality above and beyond the normal kind of practice of having to mitigate for projects, roadway projects, and so forth. That's why this particular project does not pay for mitigation of any transportation project impacts. So having said that, this particular program has a very important component, and that is there has to be a transportation nexus. You know, we all know that water quality could be as a result of other activities that's not necessarily tied to transportation. So given that this is tied to a transportation sales tax, the key is there has to be a transportation nexus. And in the early years, the Environmental Cleanup Allocation Committee, which was created by the Measure M ordinance, actually vetted what that transportation nexus meant and had a very refined definition to ensure that the use of the funds are strictly to clean up basically pollution as a result of transportation activities and on public roadway system and so forth. So the other components that are germane to this program is that it's on a competitive basis. So this is similar to what Joe will be talking about later tonight in terms of the CTFP process. And it's to fund capital improvements, not operation. So we wanted to make sure that there are tangible improvements out there. And the idea was not to fund street sweeping or any type of operational costs that are the responsibility of the 34 cities in the County of Orange. And finally, the key, tying back to what I alluded to earlier, is that it's not to supplant any sort of requirements or any mitigation for a particular project. It has to be above and beyond. Next slide, please. So in terms of the eligible applicants, I touched on that, 34 cities, County of Orange. Although it is unique in the sense that for this particular program, I believe it's the only program within the entire sales tax measure as it relates to the competitive side where a non-eligible applicant that's not any of the 34 Orange County cities or the County of Orange can actually apply for funds under this program, and they're listed there. However, they have to be sponsored by either the County of Orange or any of the 34 cities that are within Orange County. So that's where it's unique, but at the end of the day, it is going to be the 34 cities and the County of Orange who would be the lead on any of these projects. Next slide, please. So in terms of the funding programs, the program itself is split into kind of two sub-funds in a sense. There's the tier one, which is really the low-hanging fruit of removing the trash and the debris. And we've had calls on an annual basis. And by the way, since this is a competitive grants program, there is a match requirement. And that's where you see under the tier one, there's a 20% local cash match that's required for any of the calls. And we have been issuing annual call for projects since 2011. In fact, the board just approved funding of roughly $2.7 million for 10 projects a couple of days ago yesterday at yesterday's board meeting. And for each annual call under tier one, it's roughly about $2.8 million available. Under tier two, there is a 50% match, and we haven't had a tier two call since basically 2013. And the next call is really to be determined. And the reason for that is tier two really looks at major capital intensive improvements that are multi-jurisdictional. So tier one, you're looking at these smaller scale projects that are up to $500,000 of OCTA contribution per project, per applicant. Under tier two, at least the way the rules were written back in 2013, the OCTA contribution was somewhere in the ballpark of $5 million. So you could conceivably back then have a $10 million project for which OCTA would contribute 1/2 of that. However, on a go-forward basis, it's likely a lot of those are going to get updated and changed in terms of the match amount, in terms of the OCTA contribution, primarily because we wanted to be consistent with the sign of the times, meaning what are the projects that are out there that are competitive today? And we've been doing survey at the staff level, and it doesn't seem like there's a lot of projects that are really at that high of a scale, primarily because of the amount of resources that an agency would have to expend prior to coming to OCTA to seek this pot of money. So next slide, please. So under the tier 1, I mentioned it's really for trash and debris, the low-hanging fruits. It's really for the purchase and installation of various, what we call BMP measures. And they're really simple projects that can be installed in a matter of months. And the cities can actually complete many of their projects well within a 12-month period. And as I mentioned earlier, it's $500,000 per applicant per call. So any city could have one project at $500,000. If they're successful, they can get the $500,000, or they can have multiple projects. That amount has changed over the years, but what the allocation committee kind of recommended the changes to the $500,000, I believe it was a couple of years back, when they saw that the cities were getting more sophisticated in terms of the projects that they were coming forth with. And so that's why the recommendation was to have a $500,000 maximum allotment per applicant per call. Next slide, please. So in terms of the tier 1 grant, we're funded almost 200 projects. That includes those projects that were funded this past Monday, and roughly $30 million. So you're looking at about 200 projects, $30 million over the better part of the decade. And in terms of the magnitude and positive outcome, you're looking at over $33 million. 33 million gallons of trash captured during that time period. So that's pretty significant. And that 33 million is actually should be a higher number, because those projects that were funded, particularly yesterday as well as last year, are not necessarily captured in that number. So that's kind of a moving target that would go up as the years go by. And as I mentioned, the board just approved 10 projects, $2.7 million at yesterday's meeting. So next slide, please. So this is just an example of the various BMP measures. So this is what we call an automatic retractable screen. It basically is in this position when it rains, and it captures the leaves and debris, and then a trash sweeper can come by and basically pick all of that up, instead of all of that trash going into the storm drain and ultimately the ocean. Next slide, please. This is a marina trash skimmer. I believe this one is actually in the Dana Point Harbor, if I remember correctly, one of the earlier ones that we funded from a handful of years ago. And the idea is to basically strategically place the trash skimmer in a place within the harbor where all of the trash tends to kind of settle in and capture all of that trash, and it gets pumped out by a truck to clean up the marina. Next slide, please. So under the tier 2, as I mentioned, it's capital intensive, much larger scale, and it involves multiple jurisdictions, which is why it's complex from a planning and engineering standpoint. And again, the $5 million is something that was of yesteryears in terms of what was available at that time in 2013. And the reason why I bring up the fact that it likely will be a lower number is back in the early years for the tier 2, OCTA bonded against future revenues under Measure M to have a larger amount of money for calls. And on a go-forward basis, the allocation committee actually recommended that we do not bond against future revenues, at least not for the foreseeable future under the Tier 2 program, to maximize the amount of, ultimately, to maximize the amount of funds that would be available. And just as a quick background, anytime you bond against future revenues, you basically lose capacity because there's the interest and borrowing costs, which is the reason why the allocation committee recommended against it. Next slide, please. So in terms of the two calls we've had, there were roughly about $30 million available for those two calls through the bonding against future revenues. And those two, 2012 and 2013, there were a total of basically 20 some odd projects that were funded. And you can see the amount, roughly 13 million for the first call and 15 million for the second call. And then we're currently working internally and also ultimately with the allocation committee to see when it would be appropriate for the next call. At this time, it looks like it may be sometime in that 2022-23 time frame. Part of the reason is not just the funding availability, it's also to make sure that there are a number of potential applicants out there that are somewhat shovel ready. What we don't want to do is start awarding projects to applicants who are years out and locking up the funds. That's not the purpose of the sales tax measure. That's definitely not the purpose of this program, which is why we want to make sure it's not about just OCTA having the funds readily available, but the other end of the equation is making sure these projects are as shovel ready as possible. And to that end, the cities and the county would have to invest a lot of upfront investments in terms of the planning engineering efforts. Next slide, please. So here's an example of one of the tier 2 projects that were funded. It's an infiltration detention basin. These are large, basically infiltration systems that are underground. And this is during the construction of, I believe this one is in Anaheim, that we funded from years back. Next slide, please. This is a smaller scale tier 2 bioswale where effectively it's an artificial bioswale. And the idea is to capture the water in kind of a gore area and allow it to settle and basically kind of infiltrate. And by the time the water gets into the groundwater, it's much cleaner. So that's kind of the thought process by using nature as a way to assist in the process and also to accelerate the process, the cleaning process of the water. Next slide, please. So in terms of the next steps for the tier 1, we have been having tier 1 call for projects, as I noted earlier, since 2011, and it looks like in a foreseeable future, we're going to continue to have those tier 1 $2.8 million call for projects. There is definitely a need out there by the cities as well as the county. And as we go through the program, we're going to assess every year, is there going to be a need for the tier 1 program? And so far, we're seeing that there is absolutely the need for a tier 1 call on an annual basis. Next slide, please. So under the tier 2, as I mentioned earlier, we're working internally and ultimately with the allocation committee to determine whether or not there are enough shovel-ready projects out there, and then also what is the amount of money that might be available for a call in the 2022-23 timeframe. So none of these are set in stone, but at least staff is getting geared up for the tier 2 call while we're having those tier 1 call on a regular basis to, in a way, meet the needs from the local agencies on smaller scale projects. And I believe that concludes my remarks. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Dan. Any questions for Dan?
Just a comment from here, Shannon. Those are impressive projects. Thanks for sharing those with us. It really gives us a good scope as to what we're doing with that. Thank you.
Sure, thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, thank you, Dan.
Okay, thank you.
Next on our agenda is item 4B, and that's the Comprehensive Transportation Funding Programs update from Joe Alcock, the section manager of M2 Local Programs. Joe?
Good evening. Thank you, Chair Davies and members of the committee. Again, Joe Alcock, M2 Local Programs Section Manager here at OCTA. And our group handles all of the discretionary or competitive call for projects for the M2 funding program. Jared, are you? Oh, I'm sorry, I'm not seeing the. Can we go to the next slide, please? We refer to all these funding programs in aggregate as the M2 Comprehensive Transportation Funding Programs, or CTFP. And tonight we just want to provide a broad overview of the programs within the CFP in order to familiarize yourself with them and also to answer any questions that you may have. The CTFP primarily consists of 7 competitive programs. And they include the Regional Capacity Program, which is also called Project O, the Signal Synchronization Program, which is called Project P. There are 3 transit funding programs, Projects S, B, and W, and then the Environmental Cleanup Program, the Tier 1 and Tier 2 components, which Dan just discussed with you guys. In order to be eligible to apply for M2 competitive funds, Orange County local agencies need to meet basic eligibility requirements, which are specified through the M2 ordinance, and some of which this committee reviews via its AER subcommittee. Local agencies are also required to provide local matching funds so that the agencies are also contributing a portion of their funds or have some skin in the game when it comes to applying for and using M2 funds. Next slide, please. So first up, and probably the most well-known component of the CTFP, is the Regional Capacity Program. This program is designed to fund improvements to the Orange County Master Plan of Arterial Highways, or also known as the MPH. And these are primarily the larger and more regionally significant roadways in the county. Since the inception of M2, OCTA has committed or programmed approximately $339 million, which has included some leveraged external funding sources too, to fund 201 project phases and a total of 164 projects. The Regional Capacity Program offers 3 funding programs within it, which include an Arterial Capacity Enhancement Program. So this primarily funds widening of MPH roadways. There's an Intersection Capacity Enhancement Program, which is focused on providing funding for intersection improvements. And then there's a Freeway Arterial Street Transitions, or FAST program. And this program is designed to fund roadway improvements near freeway interchanges to facilitate transitions to and from the arterial roadway system to the freeway system. Next slide, please. Next, we have the Signal Synchronization Program, or Project P. The goal of this program is to provide competitive funds for traffic signal coordination across jurisdictional boundaries. To date, the board has programmed $126 million in M2 funds with some leverage resources, and has funded 235 project phases and a total of 119 projects. The program provides funds for both capital and then operation, maintenance, and monitoring efforts in order to maintain the signal timing over a period of time. And I should have mentioned the board yesterday authorized a call for projects for this program in the amount of $8 million for the 2022 call. And the timing of the call would focus on having applications due to OCTA in late October, and staff anticipates providing programming recommendations for board consideration for this call would be in the spring of 2022. I should also note that on the Project O program, which I just talked about, the board on Monday also authorized $32 million in M2 funds for that call for projects. which would also meet the same timeline requirements. Applications due in late October and final recommendations for board consideration in spring 2022. Next slide, please. And now we have the transit programs. The CTFP provides funding for three distinct transit competitive programs here. First is Project S, which has funded transit extensions to Metrolink. The program's provided about $732,000 in M2 funds to support 4 projects. To date, there are no currently active Project S services, as these have either been canceled or their grant terms have been completed. Next up is the popular Project V. This is the community-based transit circulators program. To date, the board has programmed about $52 million to support various regional trolley-related services throughout the county. And that's really all I'm going to go into on this program right now, as I'm going to cover it in a later agenda item tonight with the Project V update. And then there's the Project W program. This program provides bus stop amenity improvements at the busiest bus stops in Orange County. The program's typically provided for new shelters, benches, and other waiting amenities. To date, the board's programmed about $3.1 million to support bus stop improvements throughout the county, which a portion have either been committed or are currently in the process of being completed. Next slide. This is the environmental cleanup program, which Dan just talked about. So as he mentioned, there's a tier 2 component for the smaller, more visible forms of pollutants. He mentioned, with the board's approval of programming recommendations last Monday, the total programmed for this amount since inception of M2 is about $30 million, and we've funded about 199 different project phases. And then the Tier 2 program, the larger program, $27 million program to date for about 22 phases. Next slide, please. And here we have just some overall notes on how we administer these large and varied programs. First and foremost, calls for projects for each of these programs either occur annually or periodically, and depending on M2 cash flow, demand, as Dan was talking about, and general overall economic conditions. We also amend the CTFP guidelines, which are the funding rules for each of these programs during each call for projects process, based upon lesson learned, local agencies' input, and sort of best management practices, as well as M2 ordinance requirements. And we continuously then monitor the projects that receive M2 funds through what is known as our semi-annual review process, where we twice annually review, report, and or modify as appropriate projects that are funded through the program if they do require some sort of adjustment that is typically requested by the local agency. The semi-annual review process is quite extensive. Staff reviews 300 plus M2 funded projects twice annually, and again works with the local agencies to make updates as appropriate. We also monitor project delivery through these various CTFP programs on the back end through M2 payment reimbursements and periodic audit. And then finally, overall M2 program and project delivery performance of the CTFP is reported quarterly to the board through M2 quarterly updates and various other PMO related updates. And so with that, this is kind of my broad overview of the CTFP. I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have, but this concludes my PowerPoint. Thank you.
Are there any questions for Joe? Hearing none. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you, Chair.
That brings us to item 4C, and that's an I-405 improvement project update from program managers Stephen King and Chris Bockley, PA Public Outreach Section Manager. Steve and Chris?
Good evening, Chair Davies and members of the committee. I'm Stephen King, OCTA's project manager for the 405 Improvement Project. And joining me to present the last couple of slides of the presentation will be Chris Bockley from OCTA's public outreach team. Today we'll provide a brief project overview, an update of what has been accomplished in the past few months, and then what is upcoming for the rest of 2021 and into 2022. Next slide, please. As shown on the left of slide 2, the project limits are from approximately State Route 73 in Costa Mesa to Interstate 605 in Seal Beach, a length of approximately 16 miles. As shown in the right, one regular general purpose lane will be added in each direction of the 405, consistent with Measure M, as depicted in yellow. Depicted in green is an additional lane which will be added in each direction that will combine with the existing carpool lane to provide dual express lanes from State Route 73 to Interstate 605. The total cost of the project is approximately $2.08 billion. Next slide, please. As shown on slide 3, the project was environmentally cleared in May of 2015. And in 2017, shortly after the TIFIA loan from the federal government was executed, OCTA issued a notice to proceed number 2 to our design builder, OC405 Partners. NTP2 was a full notice to proceed for all activities, including construction, and construction began over 3 years ago in March of 2018. The project is currently on schedule to meet our key milestones of substantial completion of construction and opening of the 405 express lanes in late 2023. Next slide, please. Slide 4 provides a general project update, and this design build project is over 60% complete from both an earned value standpoint and an overall schedule standpoint. In October of 2020, OCTA staff received board approval to pursue a reset of the interest rate on the TIFIA loan. OCTA has applied and is currently working with the Federal Build America Bureau to reset the 2.91% interest rate on the 2017 TIFIA loan. If successful, the current interest rate could be reduced, resulting in substantial savings to OCTA. We are substantially complete with both the design and possession of nearly of all necessary right-of-way for the project. 5 bridges have been replaced and are complete, and I'll discuss the progress of the bridge construction in several of the upcoming slides. A majority of the walls needed for the project are anticipated to be complete by the end of the year. And this summer, we are at our peak of construction activities, and there are over 1,000 workers involved in the project each and every day. Next slide, please. The next several slides reflect construction progress out on the project site. Slide 5 here shows the 5 bridges that are complete and open to traffic. On the top row, the Talbert, Slater, and Bouchard bridges are complete in the city of Fountain Valley. And the Magnolia Bridge in the lower left was the first 2-stage bridge to open to traffic in May and borders the cities of Fountain Valley, Westminster, and Huntington Beach. The McFadden Bridge in the lower right was completed last year and connects the cities of Westminster and Huntington Beach. Next slide, please. This slide reflects construction in Costa Mesa of the Fairview Road Bridge on the left and on the northbound off-ramp on the right. These photos show some of the aesthetic features that are on all of the bridges and sound walls in the project. And the Fairview Bridge is anticipated to fully open to traffic before next summer. Next slide, please. Slide number 7 reflects construction of the Brookhurst Bridge and the demolition of Warner Bridge. In the Brookhurst Bridge photo on the left, the contractor was installing the steel falsework beams that hold up the new concrete bridge during construction. The first half of the Brookhurst Bridge is anticipated to open around the end of the year. And the photo on the right is the Warner Bridge being demolished back in June. Next slide, please. In this slide, the photo on the left shows the reconstruction of the Heil pedestrian overcrossing landing near Heil Avenue. This pedestrian overcrossing will be complete and open to pedestrians around the end of this year. And the photo on the right shows a large concrete pour taking place on the Ettinger Bridge, which is also anticipated to be open to traffic around the end of the year. Once Ettinger Bridge is complete, we'll begin reconstruction at Newland. Next slide, please. Slide 9 shows photos of the bridge construction at Golden West and Edwards. In the Golden West photo on the left, in the foreground, you can see the new underground abutment footing that will support the bridge as construction comes up out of the ground. The Golden West Bridge is anticipated to fully open to traffic by the summer of next year. And the photo on the right shows the concrete deck pour on the Edwards Bridge. And the Edwards Bridge is the next bridge that will open to traffic in September. And once the Edwards Bridge is complete, we anticipate initiating the reconstruction of Springdale Bridge. Next slide, please. Slide 10 shows construction of the second half of Bolsa Chica Bridge. The crane shown on the left is lifting the concrete girders into place that will support the new bridge deck. And the photo on the right shows the girders in place after installation. Bolsa Chica is anticipated to fully open to traffic around the end of this year as well. Next slide, please. Slide 11 shows in green the 5 bridge replacements that are complete that I mentioned earlier. The 3 bridges shown in red are the only bridges that have not yet started construction, with the exception of the new bridge, new 405-73 connector shown on the south end is in red, but actually just started construction. And the other 2 bridges at Newland and Springdale will start construction later this year. As you can see in the graphic, we're a significant number of bridges under construction right now, and these bridges are shown in orange. Next slide, please. Slide 12 is a summary of the 18 bridges that are being replaced as part of the project and reflects the progress made to date and our anticipated progress over the next 2 years. The second column of the matrix shows whether the bridge is being built in 1 or 2 stages, and the columns on the right show the anticipated opening dates of each bridge. In terms of the bridges being built in 1 or 2 stages, a single stage bridge is knocked down in complete totality and rebuilt up as fast as we can. A 2-stage bridge is knocked down 1 half at a time. The first half is rebuilt, and then traffic is moved over to the new half of the bridge, and traffic on the old half has been moved, allowing demolition of the second half of the bridge while we build that up, and then we connect the 2 bridges. By the end of this year, we anticipate having 9 of the 18 bridge replacements complete, with 5 or more bridges being completed in 2022, and then the final 4 bridges being completed in middle of 2023. Next slide, please. Although the project does continue to progress well, we recognize that there are risks remaining as we head towards the last 2 years of the major construction. Slide 13 reflects some of those risks from an archaeological resources standpoint. We recently started excavating in the area. We have had discoveries to date and it is likely that additional discoveries could be encountered there. The project team has been very proactive in our approach to this area to be sensitive to these potential resources and to minimize risk to the project schedule.
Oh, Stephen, it looks like you got muted there. I think something happened here.
Okay.
And real quick, we just had someone join via phone call. Is that someone?
This is Michael Pasquale.
Okay, thank you, Michael. Sorry, Stephen, go ahead.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll jump back up to the start of the risk items. Can anyone tell me where I left off? All right, I'll jump back up to
archaeological discoveries.
Okay, from an archaeological resources standpoint, we recently started excavating in the area. We have discoveries to date, so that's likely an additional discoveries would be encountered in that general location. So the project team is being proactive in our approach to this area to be sensitive to those potential resources and to minimize risk to the project schedule. Contaminated soil has also been a challenge over the past 6 months and will continue to be a risk during excavation activities. Another risk is COVID-19. That remains a risk. There continues to be many unknowns surrounding the pandemic and really when it will end. So we're monitoring that. Utility relocations are a risk on every project, and we'll continue to focus on timely relocations as necessary to maintain the project schedule. The design builder and the toll lane system integrator, who are under separate contracts with OCTA, will both be working in the median or the middle of the freeway near the end of the construction. And this is going to require very close coordination between the two. So we'll be monitoring that progress as we go. Next slide, please. And I'm going to kick it over to Mr. Chris Buckley, who's going to discuss some of the ongoing public outreach efforts.
Thank you, Stephen. Appreciate it. Good evening, Chair Davies and members of the committee. Again, this is Chris Buckley, Section Manager for Capital Projects Outreach. The 405 Project Community Outreach Team has been conducting virtual meetings since March 2020 to keep the public informed of major activities on the project. We conducted 5 of these meetings in the last quarter alone, and more people are participating in them. Each meeting is recorded and draws an average of more than 200 people, with about a quarter of those participating live and the rest viewing the recording. That's nearly triple the average number of people who join a typical in-person meeting. So these virtual meetings allow the team to really maximize outreach efforts. It's efficient for us to respond to community questions in real time and highlight project activities that might impact the public. We also brief key stakeholders throughout the project corridor, such as our partners at Bellaterra and South Coast Plaza, and the teams at Orange Coast Medical Center and the Orange County Fair and Event Center, among others. And we present updates to OCTA's Citizens Advisory Committee and Diverse Community Leaders Group, as well as other internal stakeholders such as this committee. The team received 277 inquiries from the public in the last quarter, with the calls and emails focused on topics such as construction activities, bridge and ramp designs, or closures and detours. Our interactive map, which is tied to the Waze navigation app, provides up-to-date information about those closures and detours, and we are seeing increasing use of that tool. In addition, we've ramped up our use of location-based advertising, which delivers short messages about construction to mobile devices in specific geographic areas. Next slide, please. So as we move further into the second half of 2021, we are providing community updates on a handful of bridges under construction, and then we're going to be turning our attention to major work starting at Springdale and Newland, as Stephen mentioned. In addition, we'll also be discussing the new 405 to 73 Express Lanes connector that just began construction. We'll continue to hold focused discussions with small groups of residents and business owners who live and work next to the project. These discussions allow us to coordinate closely with these stakeholders, ensuring construction and traffic impacts are minimized. Meanwhile, we have evolved our strategy to reach diverse and disadvantaged communities by promoting access to Vietnamese and Spanish in-person translators, engaging with partners at community and faith-based organizations, and promoting local Vietnamese and Latinx businesses through our new 405 Forward program. We launched this program in conjunction with the May opening of the Magnolia Street Bridge. It supports and promotes businesses near the project corridor by encouraging communities to eat and shop locally and use local services. Our team has visited more than 300 businesses near the Magnolia and Warner interchanges, and approximately 110 businesses have signed up for the program. Given its success, we anticipate expanding the program in the coming months to other areas along the project corridor. That's it for our presentation. We'd be happy to answer any questions.
This is Andy for the 405 express lanes. What's the timing on like the infrastructure behind that?
So our substantial completion date for all of construction is tied to the opening of an operation of the express lane. So we're looking at late 2023 for that. We have already started constructing some of the infrastructure as far as gantry foundations and things that may be necessary in the ground.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Any particular reason for connecting only to Waze and not Google Maps or?
Sure. So actually, our partnership with Waze is one of the first between a public agency and the navigation app, and we basically were able to build a relationship with the developer of the app. You know, Waze obviously being owned by Google at this point, but with the original developers of the app, and coordinate providing them information from the traffic management plan, which includes city-approved detours. There's no real way for us to do that with Google Maps. Google Maps does pull some of the information from Waze because, again, Waze is owned by Google, but we don't have that same ability to connect with Google.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions for Stephen or Chris? Great. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Before we move on, I do want to circle back and acknowledge that Michael Pasquale did join the meeting. Can that be noted, Alice?
Yes, Chair Davies, we will note in the minutes that Michael Pasquale is in attendance. Correct, Michael, you joined a while ago, correct?
Yes, I did. I joined I was 15 minutes late.
Okay, no worries. We just, for the minutes and to verbally acknowledge it right now. We will note that in the attendance.
Thank you very much, Chair Davis.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you, Alice. Next up, item 5 are OCTA staff updates. First, we'll have an update on the OC streetcar from Teresa Oliveri, Community Relations Officer. Teresa?
Hi, good afternoon, good evening to Chair Davies and committee members. I'm Teresa Oliveri, Community Relations Principal here at OCTA, and I manage the outreach program for the OC streetcar project. Next slide, please. When in service, the OC streetcar will travel a 4.15-mile route on a combination of ballasted track, which is similar to what you see for Metrolink service, and embedded track. The route can begin to the left of the screen. You see where Harbor Boulevard is. We travel on the diagonal path across the Pacific Electric right-of-way and then transition to the embedded track at about the middle of your screen there at Rate Street. Then we continue eastbound and go down Santa Ana Boulevard We go then north on Mortimer after we pass through the downtown and reconnect with Santa Ana Boulevard and finish up back at the Metrolink station there in Santa Ana. And the little purple box that you see at about middle of the screen will be the future maintenance and storage facility. And can I have the next slide, please? And here you see that the site. This is looking northeast from the Pacific Electric right-of-way. And here in the foreground, you can see the car wash area, and the large slab that you see in the background is the foundation for the facility itself, which is a multi-story facility that will house both the staff that to do the maintenance, pardon me, as well as the rest of the area is where the cars will come in to be serviced at night. Next slide, please. Here you can see two of the center platforms, one at Fairview and one at Rate Street. The tracks have already been embedded across Fairview, which connects one side of the PE right-of-way to the other side. And this platform that you see at Fairview, we're looking westbound there. The platform on the right at Rate Street is also the view looking westbound. Slide 5, please. So this shows some of the track installation. I've included a snapshot of the plans there that you see in the middle, and then to the left of that is what it looks like in real life. And it's always surprising to me, no matter how long you work on these projects, that they really take that the designers and everyone see this project in 3D in the plans, and then it comes to life as the contractors get involved. The portion that you're seeing there is they're setting a very tight rail curve as the track turns from 4th Street and it goes northbound on Mortimer. The other image that you see there at Rate Street, remember we saw the platform looking westbound. Now if you turn around and face, that would be what you see there looking now eastbound. This photo is a little bit old. The track, as you see, has been embedded as well, and most of the median work in this section of the project is completed as well. Next slide, please. So here's a couple images of the cars. They are in production at the Siemens facility up in Sacramento. They're in various stages of completion and testing. They move in and out of the facility as needed to perform different elements of the testing protocols. We are in negotiations with Siemens regarding options for vehicle storage to align with the availability of the project infrastructure needed to accept and test the vehicles. Next slide, please. This is a view inside the car. You can see that the floor is covered with paper to protect it as it goes in and out of testing. And the picture all the way to the right shows the area, the open area where people can either stand. That's where if you're in a wheelchair or you're a parent with a stroller, or if you have a bicycle with you, can walk in off the platform and safely travel. Next slide, please. And throughout construction and throughout COVID, we've continued to provide information about the project's progress and activities. We provide bilingual door-to-door flyers to residents and business owners along the alignment. We also post information on the project's social media channels, and we send out a bi-weekly update to the project's database. We will also meet in the field when the need arises to discuss targeted activities or issues. We have partnered with the 2 business associations that serve downtown Santa Ana to bring visibility to the businesses who are adjacent to the route. And in addition to that partnership, we began a program called Eat, Shop, Play that provides targeted online ad support. The program is free to join, and our materials there are bilingual as well. Our initial target was 40 businesses, and we are well above that at 57 and counting. Next slide, please. And these are different ways that the public and others can get in touch with us, and I'm available to answer any questions.
Doug Gillen with a question.
Mm-hmm.
I remember at the groundbreaking over at the RTC that there was sort of a clock that started at the point in time of about 800 days from the time that the final funding was provided to the point in time that the cars would actually be delivered. Has there been some delay in that just because of other variables in this particular scenario?
So I think you may be confusing the 800 days with a project, but just in general, the answer to your question is yes, there have been a number of delays on the project. We found architectural remains similar to what they've experienced on the 405. That's delayed us. When we were excavating on Santa Ana Boulevard, we found remnants of the old red car line that we did not necessarily identify during the design phase. So we had to remove those in a very specific way. There have been a number of things that have happened. Santa Ana is an old city, and once you start peeling back the asphalt, you discover a lot of issues that are underground that weren't identified. So we have to, figure out ways to mitigate them. So our revenue service date currently is looking at 2023.
Okay, I was just kind of wondering too, because I've noticed that there's been track laid along Santa Ana Boulevard and along where the old bus station was, but they haven't concreted those in yet. It's just kind of wondering, and it's been several months for some of those tracks to just kind of lay there, wondering what was, is this going to be finished off so the traffic through that area can go back to some kind of normal, or is there some reason for this delay?
That has been a particular sort of challenge for us. There are a number of utilities that weren't identified. We did do a lot of early work with the gas company and SoCal Edison to come in and move some of their facilities. And then we came in and did the sewer work. But as I said before, we've encountered other issues there that I think you'll begin to see some activity happening there over the next couple of weeks. They have pours scheduled to come in, and we had some alignment issues that we had to address, as well as some elevation issues. So I think we've got a lot of tools in our toolbox over the past several months, and the Walsh is anxious to get back in that area and begin production so we can flip start, so the public can have, Santa Ana Boulevard back.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for Teresa? Great, thank you, Teresa.
Thank you.
Next up is a sales tax update from Sean Murdoch, Director of Finance and Administration. Sean?
Great. Good evening, Chairman Davies and members of the TOC committee. My name is Sean Murdoch. I'm Director of Finance at OCTA. And I'm here to provide a quick update on the M2 sales tax receipts, as well as an update on when we anticipate final forecast figures and when they will come to this committee. So as I mentioned at the last TOC committee meeting, we saw tremendous growth in M2 sales tax receipts in the third quarter ending March, which really took the M2 sales tax receipts from really decreasing when you compared them year over year through December, through the first half of our fiscal year ending, which was in December, to growing through the third quarter of the fiscal year. So it was really a great quarter between that January, February, March quarter. We continue to see large sales tax advances from the CDTFA, which is the California Department of Tax and Fee Administration, which handles the administration of sales tax for the state. We continue to see very large advances for them in the fourth quarter, which ended June, and are hopeful that when we receive our final true-up payment for last fiscal year and for that quarter, that the advances were accurate. Just to step back, so for those not familiar with how OCTA receives its sales tax, we do receive our sales tax 2 months in arrears. So each month, OCTA receives an advance from the CDTFA, and then the second month following the end of a quarter, the CDTFA sends a true-up payment that reconciles the prior quarter. And for us, that sort of finalizes the prior quarter. So since our fiscal year ends in June, this August, August 23rd, we will receive the notification of what our final payment was that dates back to June, and that'll allow us to close out our fiscal year. We have also received our updated forecasts for the new fiscal year. So when we can finalize last year's sales tax numbers, we can apply the updated forecast numbers that we received and come up with a final forecast for this year's Measure M program. So I did want to mention that last year's sales tax forecast for the Measure M2 program fell from 13.4 billion to 11.6 billion. That's the sales tax for the estimate for the entire 30-year program. And that was really due to the impact of COVID. We conservatively estimate that the forecast will actually grow this year from approximately 11.6 billion, we think conservatively, to 12.5 billion, based on sort of what we estimate last year's sales tax figure to be combined with the updated forecast. Now, I'm hopeful that we can beat that estimate, but like I said, we will actually know what our fiscal year ending number is in 2 weeks, and then we'll be able to provide those numbers to our Finance and Administration Committee, the OCTA board, and then also this committee. And I would anticipate coming back to this committee at the next TOC meeting to provide sort of what that final forecast number is. So that concludes my comments, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for Sean? All righty, thank you, Sean.
Thank you.
Next up is a Measure M2 Community-Based Transit Circulators Program, Project V. And we welcome back Joe Alcock. Joe?
Thank you, Chair Davies, members of the committee. As I mentioned in my prior PowerPoint, Project V is an M2 competitive program. It provides both capital and operating funds to support community-based transit circulators. To date, the board has approved $52 million in M2 funds to support these services throughout the county. As you can imagine, COVID-19 has had an impact on these services. As of the last reporting period, 12 services are active, and these services include the Anaheim Canyon Metrolink Connector Service, the county's Ranch Ride Service, Dana Point's Trolleys, Laguna Beach's Summer Breeze Service, the Newport Beach Balboa Peninsula Trolley, San Clemente's SC Rides program, which is provided by Lyft, San Clemente's Downtown Trolley Services, as well as San Juan Capistrano's service. The number of active services, as I mentioned, was impacted by COVID. It's up from, at the height of the pandemic, there were just 2 services operated. So we're seeing services slowly starting to come back. We understand this number is going to increase again later this summer, early fall, with 3 additional services being scheduled to resume in Irvine, Laguna Beach, and La Habra. And then in early 2022, 2 new services are scheduled to begin in Huntington Beach and Laguna Niguel. To support Project V services throughout the pandemic and to kind of modify the program moving forward, the board in early 2021 revised the program's minimum performance requirements from a boarding per revenue vehicle hour requirement, which some of you may be familiar with. We've reported on those to this committee before, to a minimum cost per boarding metric, which also includes certain city council disclosure requirements with regard to project cost. Currently, staff is working to update all Project V cooperative agreements with local agencies to implement these board-approved changes. And we're also continuing both to monitor ridership and service costs on a quarterly basis, and then reporting those findings to the board semi-annually in January and July of each year. In addition to these ongoing efforts, we continue to monitor the COVID-19 and best practices related to transit industry guidance, and we provide this information as appropriate to local agency project managers. With that, concludes my update on Project V. Happy to answer any questions.
Are there any questions for Joe? Okay, thank you, Joe.
Thank you, Chair Davies.
Next up is staff liaison update from Alice Rogan, Marketing and Public Outreach Director. Alice?
Thank you, Chair Davies. At this time, well, up until recently, we were anticipating that all public committee meetings would be held in person following Labor Day. But with things changing now, we're not exactly sure what if this executive order is going to be extended to allow for virtual meetings with what's going on. I think that expires currently in mid-September. So just stay tuned. We had hoped that in October we could be in person, but stay tuned and we'll let you know. So we are monitoring and these mandates and executive orders. Welcome the 3 new members, as Chair Davies said in the beginning, and then our 1 returning member. We did just have an orientation, but it was kind of rushed. So as I mentioned at the orientation, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me or anybody else. And then Jared also included the most recent coronavirus updates for you to see what we're doing as an agency regarding our coronavirus efforts. And I encourage you to review those as well. So Chairman Davies, that concludes my report.
Thank you. Any questions for Alice?
Yeah, Steve Sloan, have subcommittee assignments been made?
Yes, they have. Jared, do you have the list of the subcommittee assignments?
I do. So I can start with our new members. Let's see, one moment. We have Mr. Ajay on the Environmental Oversight Committee, and we have Andrew Ramirez and Shannon O'Toole on the AER subcommittee. And then if you'd like the returning members, just need one moment to pull that up. Give me 1 second, looking for it.
I'm looking at my notes. I think I have on audit subcommittee, we have Tuan, Nguyen, Michael Pasquale, Frank Davies, and Mark Kazar. I think I'm missing one person there. And then for AER, I have Doug Gillen, Harry Sloan, Joe McCarthy, and Doug Anderson. I don't think that's right. I think one of those moved over to audit subcommittee. That would put too many members. Did you get it, Jared?
I do, yeah. So we have Steve Sloan on the audit subcommittee, Mark Kazar on the audit subcommittee, Joseph McCarthy on the AER, Tuan Nguyen on the audit subcommittee, Michael Pasquale on the audit subcommittee, Douglas Anderson on the AER, and then Chairman Davies on audit as well. And then I already read off the new members.
Thank you.
Great. Maybe we can get a listing of that, Alice, at some point.
Will do. All right. Thank you. That concludes my report.
Thank you. Next up is the annual eligibility review subcommittee report from Joe Alcock. Joe?
Yes, thank you, Chair Davies. I just wanted to note that the AER subcommittee meeting for this fiscal year is looking like it'll be scheduled towards the end of September, around the September 23rd time frame. And the meeting will focus on receiving and reviewing phase 1 eligibility submittals, including pavement management plans, the congestion management program, and mitigation fee programs. Thank you, Chair Davies.
Thank you, Joe. Next is the audit subcommittee report, for which I'm the chair of this subcommittee. There was no meeting today due to the new member orientation. So no report at this time. I would imagine the next available time for a meeting would be at our at the October timeframe. Next, that brings us to the Environmental Oversight Committee report. Jared?
All right, and I'll be providing this report today, given that we don't have an AER chair, or an EOC representative that was assigned to the committee at the time of this being posted. So the Environmental Oversight Committee met last week and received updates on OCTA's Conservation Plan annual report, fire management plans, and the status of the hike, equestrian ride events. In addition, the 2020 Conservation Plan annual report documents activities throughout the 2020 calendar year and adheres to guidelines from state and federal wildlife agencies. OCTA is complying and on target with the Conservation Plan commitments, and the plan is available online for the public. As required by the Conservation Plan, OCTA began developing fire management plans for the preserves in 2018. And the draft Silverado Chaparral Preserve Fire Management Plan has been reviewed and approved by the Orange County Fire Agencies, or Fire Authority, and is pending approval from the wildlife agencies. The review and approval for this plan is key to developing and streamlining the remaining plans, which are expected to be completed in 2021. And finally, the docent-led hike and equestrian ride events are planned to return starting in September, so right around the corner. Staff will continue to monitor the impacts of COVID-19 and determine if there's any new health agency guidance on public gatherings for the future. And Chairman Davies, that concludes my report.
Thank you, Jared. Any questions for Jared? All right. Next up, any committee member reports? Any closing remarks from any committee members? I do have one, and I just want to congratulate and acknowledge that Tuan Nguyen was approved at our last meeting as co-chair for the TOC. So thank you, Tuan, for volunteering, and congratulations. All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I want to conclude today's TOC meeting. I want to thank all of the OCTA staff that made presentations, and as well as those that helped coordinate not only this TOC meeting, but also the new member orientation meeting as well. So thank you all again. Have a great rest of your summer, and next meeting will take place October 12th, 2021 at 5 p.m. Thank you all. Goodbye.